am Lily. For several years, I had the same dream. A stranger came to me at night. He stood by the bed and watched in silence. It scared me every time until I decided to deal with it. I remember my nightmare from early childhood. As a child, he came to see me often. Most importantly, I never saw where he came from. So, the first time I heard the story about the Boogeyman coming out of the closet, I thought it was him. Everything was the same. I fell asleep. Then, woke up from a heavy gaze. When I opened my eyes, I always saw a shadow standing next to me. I never saw a face in the dark. It was too dark. Then, I turned on the night lamp. At first it worked. And then, the Boogeyman started coming again. Sometimes he disappeared. And now those days I mistakenly assumed that he would never return. But the most interesting thing is that it disappeared sometimes. And when I woke up and tried to turn on the light, it had time to disappear. I have told my mother about it many times. At first, she saw it as a child's fantasy, then as an attempt to attract attention. And then, I didn't betray it at all. That's how I grew up. No, don't think about it. My mother loved me very much. She is wonderful, very responsible, and hardworking. It's just that she didn't have much time for all this. And her main task was to earn money, because she raised me alone. Yes, I didn't have a father. It seems that they separated from my mother a long time ago, before I was born. Since then, she is the only one who takes care of me. And as you can see, she works a lot. I didn't tell anyone about the nightmare. Maybe because she had already begun to doubt its realism, or was just shy of her fears. But every appearance of the Boogeyman was maddening. I haven't gotten used to it in years. Slightest. Well, then I had the idea to share everything with a psychologist. My friend's mother was a specialist. To get to her at a big discount, I had to tell Elizabeth, the daughter of a psychologist. Liz said that this problem is solved in childhood. So, it's easier to root out the case and more likely to grow up with a healthy mind. Okay, I missed some time, but I was optimistic to catch up. The first session with Mrs. Smith was scheduled for this afternoon after school. I was terribly nervous because for the first time I had to desire to look my fears in the face. So, the first thing the psychologist asked me was what was bothering me and when exactly it started. I told him everything because I remembered every detail. The more the Boogeyman came to me, the more I thought it wasn't a dream. Every session we discussed my life situations with the doctor, and she often asked about my runaway father. But I couldn't say anything because I didn't know him. I just heard from my mom that his name is Liam. Dr. Smith suggested that my obsessive fear comes from the image of the father, since in fact the shadow in the dark symbolizes the unknown. That is, the lack of information about the father. The lack of the role of one parent also affected the psyche. So it wasn't the Boogeyman who came to me, but I unconsciously called him myself. What? By yourself? How so? He scares me to death. I'd be relieved if he didn't come to see me at all. I'm not crazy to hurt myself. I told the doctor and left. That session was the fifth and last. I decided not to spend any more money on nonsense. And the day I got home, my mother was waiting for me. She looked upset and depressed. It turns out that she was fired from her job. Accordingly, we were deprived of the means to exist. She was crying, and then she calmed down, asked me how I was doing, and suddenly remembered the Boogeyman. I told her that I had visited the doctor and also told her the doctor's arguments. My mother laughed and said it was funny. I don't blame your father. He ran away like a coward. Of course, but it was his choice. He made his, and I made mine, and I took responsibility for my decision. I think it is quite fair. We dated for a year. I loved Liam very much, but he wasn't ready for fatherhood. I'm sorry, honey. I should have told you about him earlier. I just didn't know how. Maybe the psychologist is right about something. My mother said. I interrupted her immediately and told her that I didn't blame her for anything and it would soon pass. Then I decided to dig deeper into myself. All this time, I have lived in the full belief that this is a dream. What if I don't? All this time, I was casing away thoughts and memories of the dream that I didn't even try to think it through. Today will be different. I went to bed as usual, even turned off the nightlight, but I had something under my pillow. Before going to bed, I drank a can of energy drink and crawled under the covers. At about 3:20, this shadow was standing in the room. Hell, I did fall asleep, but I woke up quickly and didn't show it. I just watched. The stranger was standing at the head of my bed, and then I realized that this is not a hallucination. Not my fantasy or dream. He's actually here. I jerked the flashlight out from under my pillow and shone it on my head. And then I screamed even more in fright. But that shadow screamed too, and louder than me. It turns out that this is a person, a middle-aged man. He didn't expect me to shine a flashlight in his face. "Just don't scream. I'll explain everything," he said. My mother burst into the room with a kitchen knife. She turned on the light and screamed too. "Liam, what are you doing here?" she asked. I looked at him in surprise, then at her. "Dad?" I finally managed. After a minute's pause, my confused parents and I sat down to talk. According to father, when he ran away from mother after hearing about the pregnancy, he was very sorry. 2 weeks later, he decided to return. But my mother wasn't there. She was gone, and he didn't know where. He spent the next few years searching for us. My father said that he often saw me in his dreams and imagined me exactly as I was. And he still managed to find us. He was afraid to come near to talk. So sometimes he just came to our house, climbed through the windows at night, and watched me sleeping. I was so happy when I found you, but I was afraid to show up officially. I once heard your mother refuse to talk about me. Then I realized that it would be better if I became a shadow. That way I can sometimes watch you grow up. And if I go near your mother, she will send me away. And I can't bear it," he said. I thought I was going crazy. I told my father. He asked for my forgiveness. Then got tired on his knees and begged my mother. Of course she was unwavering. My mother didn't want to let him into the established life. She believed that he was superfluous, and once he made the decision to leave, it was necessary to support him to the end. Dad was suffering. This was seen with the naked eye. Then he told her that everyone makes mistakes, and I will prove that he is ready to be a good father and a loyal husband. In general, a year has passed since then. My parents made up. So, the stranger from the dreams carefully got used to the role of the father.
I want to share the story of a good friend of mine named Courtney. She had lived in Chicago when she was young. In addition to studying in medical school, she helped a friend with the sale of clothes and all sorts of trinkets. And so, according to her, one day they arrived, she did not specify the city, traded, and went to the apartment. The apartment belonged to the relatives of a friend. No one lived in it, so only from time to time visiting relatives stayed. There were very old chests and things like that in the apartment, all that was left of the ancestors, and portraits hung on the walls. They had dinner with a friend and went to bed. And just as Courtney began to fall asleep, her heart suddenly became more anxious than ever. She opened her eyes and saw the portrait looking at her, as it seemed to her. The portrait was of an old man with a long beard. It was a hard look, and she felt uneasy. She turned off the nightlight and tried to sleep. But then something happened, and it was very difficult to believe. But as I remember, her story as much as goosebumps. She heard a rustle, opened her eyes, and saw a large black bird flying out of the portrait. From horror says as much as bad became. She closed her eyes and felt as if bones or something bony were beating against her chest, as if trying to break into it. She began to fight back and scream. Somehow, which was very surprised and scared, I woke up my friend. She was asleep, she says, like a dead woman. She listened incredulously, laughed, and continued to sleep. The light, however, was asked to turn off since they slept in the same room. There was nothing to do but calm down and go to sleep. But that was not the case. it was repeated with even greater force. Courtney herself is a very shy person, and it was awkward for her to wake up her friend again. Tears started to run from the horror she had experienced. She clenched her teeth. She said that her jaw was cramped, and in an instant she felt that something had penetrated her and hurt her or something. She still tried to fight back, jumped up and turned on the light. I woke up my friend, and they both did not sleep until morning. And, as they say, drove tea. A friend, too, as it turned out, was scared, but still told her that the portrait shows some kind of weather her great-grandfather. When he was alive, he was a very strong sorcerer. When people came to him, he did not look at anyone, and if he looked at someone, then that person literally died in the near future. They never stayed in that apartment again. According to Courtney, after all, something has penetrated her, although not completely. She sometimes feels like someone's presence inside her. Sometimes he speaks, as if a lump rises in his throat and tries to escape. Sometimes she experiences gratuitous aggression. She did not address this illness to anyone. There was, however, an interesting case with her. When already being married, she and her husband and relatives visited some famous holy places, I do not remember where, and in those places a famous foreteller took people at that time. I don't remember his name. It's been about 8 years since Courtney told me about all these events. I only remember that he, according to her, was by that time already a very ancient old man, a long-lived man. And now they came to a large crowd that surrounded this sorcerer. One by one, people came up to him. Then suddenly he pointed to the crowd and, to everyone's surprise, called it. Although there were a lot of people and it was simply impossible to notice it all among all, when Courtney came over, he started talking to her about this and that. She didn't tell me anything. She just told me that he took her hands and then predicted that in the future she would treat people with her hands, and especially children. Immediately, of course, she did not understand what he meant, but after many years, she really began to treat with her hands. After working as a nurse in surgery, she went to a children's hospital and started working in a massage parlor. Most often works with heavy children with cerebral palsy. Well, finally, I want to tell you that no matter what fortune teller she came to, everyone, without exception, cannot view it, so to speak. Some even says, became for some reason aggressive and kicked her out. Could also call her names. This is hard to believe. For some reason, many people perceive her as some kind of arrogant, but in fact, she is a very kind and decent person. Here is such a story. Sometimes in the lives of ordinary people, it happens that it is difficult to believe.